So the recording has just started, and just to mention again, the webinar will be presented by Sirazoom Munira, who will be presenting on Climate Vulnerable Forum in Bangladesh, Presidency Priorities for COP26. Sirazoom currently works as the program officer to support the Bangladesh government presidency of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which is based at the South Asia Regional Office of Global Center of Adaptation. And Sirazoom will explain further her role at CVF and more details about her work at CVF. Sirazoom is a 2015 Commonwealth Shared Scholar. She completed her MSc in Risk and Environmental Hazards at the University of Durham. I'm also pleased to mention that Sirazoom was part of the COP26 conference. She attended the COP26 conference this year in Glasgow, and she will be sharing her reflections post-conference. So we're really excited to hear more about her experience of attending the conference and sharing her thoughts with us in this webinar. So without any further delay, Sirazoom, over to you. A big welcome from the CSC, and we are looking forward to listening about your experience at COP26 and hearing more about your work at the CVF.
Well, thank you, Eva, for that introduction, and I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yes.
So it is really my humble opportunity to be a part of this webinar, particularly right after the COP26, to share my views and opinions about how much the Climate Vulnerable Forum has gone about. So I'll just request to go to the next slide, and we can get started with the presentation. I welcome everybody and thank everyone for their taking the time out for this particular session, which I want to cover in the following outline. First, I'll give you a little bit overview of what the Climate Vulnerable Forum is and the Vulnerable 20, and then I'll give a little bit overview of the Bangladesh presidency, which the current CVF is holding, along with the highlights of 2020 and 21. And then I'll move on to the priorities of CVF and how that overlapped into the COP26. Next slide, please. So first of all, I would like to give a very broad overview of what the Climate Vulnerable Forum, which is an international forum which has 48 countries, used to have 48 countries right before the COP, but during the COP we became a forum of 55 countries because 7 new members have joined our forum. These countries are not just vulnerable, but they are also suffering from different kinds of impacts of climate change, and they are a forum which has one thing in common, which is that they are particularly vulnerable to climate change. We have countries from all the regions, from the Latin America to the Caribbean to the Asian to the African region, and we span across these countries with different priorities, which I'll continue in my next slide. Next slide, please. So how does the Climate Vulnerable Forum work? As I said, that this is a forum of 55 countries, and each of these countries take a 2 years presidency for each of these countries. Bangladesh is currently the chair of the presidency, and before we had one more presidency in 2011 and 12. Now it is the second time of the country to currently hold the presidency. We have taken the presidency from Marshal Islands, and that's why we call it, and before that it was Ethiopia. So together we have formed a troika, which is a tripartite country partnership through which the presidency moves. So next year we will be handing over the presidency to Ghana, and that's how Bangladesh, Ghana, and Marshall Islands will become a part of the troika. Next slide, please. Climate Vulnerable Forum was formed in 2009, and it had successfully enshrined a 1.5 degrees goal as was in the heart of the Paris Agreement, and it has spearheaded multiple priorities and resolutions. maybe under different forums and broader aspects like the Human Rights Council to protect the rights affected by people who are vulnerable to climate change. And we have made different efforts to protect the climate adaptation moves of these countries, to put forward what are the priorities of these countries to take forward from the grassroots level straight up to the COP. We have multiple studies and reports of different climate vulnerability issues, including the Climate Vulnerability Monitor, the Low Carbon Monitor, and the thematic studies on issues ranging from human rights to climate change. We have another work stream, which is the Vulnerable 20, which is called a V20, which is a sister concern, which I'll explain in the next slide, please, which is the forum for the finance ministers, because in order to mobilize these priorities, we need money. And that's how we came across this forum of all the 55 countries, not to be confused with V20, because at the time it was formed, it had 20 countries. Now we have 55 countries. So it is a forum of the finance ministers of all the CVF member states, representing the 55 economies, which is systematically vulnerable to climate change. And it was formed in 2015 in Lima, and by the finance ministers of the then 20 countries. And now it's moving across through IMF, to World Bank, and different other central banks. Next slide, please. So currently, the Bangladesh presidency is chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister of the country. Usually it's the head of state. The focal ministries for the CVF is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Environment. So we have the Honorable Minister of the Environment Ministry and the Honorable Minister of the Foreign Ministry for the CVF. And we also have the Honorable Minister of the Finance Ministry, Mr. Mustafa Kamal, who is also the chair of the V20. Along with that, the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh also appointed a special envoy for the presidency, Mr. Abdul Kalam Azad, with whose leadership we're actually going forward with the presidency. Now we have 8 months left for the presidency to be over, but we are moving across with different priorities, different actions, and we are also guided by the expert advisory group, which has a chair, who is Dr. Salimul Haq, who is leading the expert advisory group, and it has 5 members who is giving technical expertise to the presidency. Next slide, please. Before I go to the highlights, I also want to mention the 5 thematic ambassadors we have, which is for vulnerability, for parliament, for culture, for ambition, and they are led by very, very highly politically sound ambassadors, including President Nasheed, Ms. Saima Wazid from Bangladesh, Ms. Kathy Jetnil from Marshall Islands, etc. I'll very quickly go through the highlights we have had from 2020 right down to 2021. We started with the CVF Troika Ministers meeting in Bangladesh announcement when Bangladesh got the presidency first. And then moving on, we have different events like the CVF Leaders event at the UN General Assembly, where we declared that we will launch a prosperity plan, which I'll come later on. We have had the Prime Minister's Ambassadors Engagements meeting. Next slide. We have had different events like the Global Parliamentary meetings, the CVF Leaders event, and the Senior Officials meeting, which will have more. In 2021, in the next slide, you can see that there is more events like the CVF Commonwealth Dialogue. We are having many different engagement programs like with the Commonwealth and with the LDCs and many other groups. So with that, we also had our regional dialogues. We already had 4 regional dialogues in Latin America, in Africa, Asia, and Pacific. And we continue all those dialogues, all those regional dialogues came across one communique for each of these regional dialogues, which we compiled together to form a Dhaka Glasgow Declaration. And we have successfully adopted the declaration in COP26, which I'll also highlight in the next slide. Next slide, maybe. Our major milestone event was the Climate Vulnerable Summit, which was in the ministerial dialogue with the launch of the consultative version of the Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan. The Climate Prosperity Plan is one of the plans that we have as a milestone product of the presidency, and it is it is a template through which can be followed by the other countries as well. Next slide, please. In highlights in 2021, as I said, we just, continuing with the regional dialogues, as I mentioned, and now in February, we also had different Asian, it was just going one of the zigzags, so I'm not being able to follow, but Yeah, if we look at October, we had the CVF senior officials meeting before we had the V20 senior officials meeting. And straight down to November, we just completed the COP26 and we had a very high level event, which I'll elaborate, where we also adopted the Dhaka Glasgow Declaration. And moving back now to Bangladesh, and we are a very global team. We will be working together to formulate the next presidency. And we also had a presidency handover briefing ceremony with Ghana, who's our next president in COP26. Next slide, please. In Bangladesh, CVF expectations for COP26, we had four basic ambitions and priorities. First, the ambition is the first is the 1.5 degrees goal of the Paris Agreement, which is our big ambition that all critical countries, which are particularly vulnerable to climate change, must seek to not compromise with the 1.5, which was our major goal. Secondly, was adaptation, and we want a global goal on adaptation, which was our main ask in COP26, that all the major countries, adaptation is a must. And we are mitigating, but mitigating to what extent? Because Bangladesh and countries like Bangladesh are very limited, very marginally responsible for the greenhouse gases. So we can mitigate, but adaptation is our main goal. In the third, next slide, please. In the third priority, we have the finance, because we have all these priorities, but the money has to go. Money has to come to these local vulnerable countries, because 100 billion promise and 50-50 split between adaptation and mitigation must be met for countries like Bangladesh, who are particularly vulnerable. In the next slide, I'll also go through the last priority, which is the Climate Prosperity Partnership. What is this? It is an investment pathway for infrastructure and different types of key economic and technical partners for prosperity. So we have developed a decadal plan, which is called the Multiplanet Prosperity Plan, and we are going through to prepare. We already prepared a template. It is right to be approved very recently, right after we go back to Bangladesh through the cabinet ministry. And it is a pathway to deliver robust socioeconomic progress and economic growth and job growth to align with the Paris Agreement and with the Sustainable Development Goals, so that by 2030 there are really milestones which are achieved. Next slide, please. In the Multiplanet Prosperity Plan, there are 6 major points which you have tried to elaborate. First is the accelerated adaptation. Second, just transition of labor and future-proofing industry. Third, the increasing public revenue to spend to the most vulnerable. Fourth, the next slide, we have the comprehensive climate and disaster risk financing and management. Fifth, leveraging 21st century technologies for well-being, because one of our thematic ambassadors for vulnerability really advocates for mental health, and which are all very related to climate change impacts. So we have also brought in the issue of well-being. And sixth, maximize renewable energy efficiency and power transportation sector for the resilience, because not all the countries are capable of producing renewable energy, but they can actually produce from wind energy and from other things, many different activities or ways to build transport resilience in the transportation sector and in the renewable energy sector. Next slide, please. In the Multiplanet Prosperity Plan, you can see in this slide that we have gone for a growth of 9%. We will target a growth of 9%, per capita increase of 137%, and we have following milestones which we have, tried to outline based on the current GDP situation, current with the per capita income situation, and the household expenditure for a very improved quality of life, cleaner air, safe workplace, and better mobility, to finally eliminate the extreme poverty situation, and also to make the country more climate resilient. These are the socioeconomic outcomes which we want to advocate for the Multiplanet Prosperity Plan. Next slide, please. So what were the key outputs and policy priorities for the COP26 for us? As I mentioned, that ambition for 1.5 degrees, adaptation including finance, including carbon markets to finalize the 1.5 degree complaint, planetary prosperity agenda through the CVF and V20 climate prosperity plans was also our ask. And finally, we also asked for financing for loss and damage without compromising adaptation needs. So these are the things that we, through our negotiations, we are not a negotiating party, but we do advocacy, and through other negotiating groups which cut across many different countries that we have, like the LDCs, the AOCs, we try to give that message to the negotiating groups. So these are the four policy priorities we had in the next COP26. Next slide, please. One of the many things that we had as our before COP26 was I will also request Eva and to also share this link of CVF Manifesto with our audience, that before the COP we developed our own CVF Manifesto for COP26. Like, what are the asks from us? In that, we had delivered that we want a delivery plan of annual ambition raising of finance, and we said that from 2020 to 2024 there will be $100 billion in $100 billion per year for the climate finance to be enhanced until 2024, which will be a 500 billion target goal. And each of these will have 50-50 allocation between adaptation and mitigation. We also went for and asked to finalize a robust carbon market mechanism, at least 5% of the proceeds for financing the urgent adaptation needs. This is not just for the presidency country, but on behalf of all the 55 countries which we have. Next slide, please. In the manifesto, we also advocated for the climate prosperity plans and how to go for the leading in adaptation and African. We also have the African Adaptation Program, which is led by the Global Center on Adaptation. We also have the emergency coalition for debt for climate swaps, which is how the countries which are least responsible for climate change can have a swap for climate, just like reforestation efforts and this and that. So how was that all encompassing into the manifesto was also outlined there. We also have a thematic ambassador for culture, Ms. Kathleen General, and she has also led the movement of a poetic way of calling for awareness, which is called When is Now. And through that, we try to underscore that time is very limited. We have to act now. We have to see the climate action through the arts, through every way possible. Through poem, we also try to create advocacy. We have also created a position for special rapporteur on climate change at the UN Human Rights Council, and we also held a number of awareness activities through IUCN for Climate Crisis Commission. And we have also done a side event at COP26, which was in line with the IUCN Climate Crisis Commission. Next slide, please. Okay, our activities at the COP. Basically, a call for CVF Commonwealth Climate Prosperity. As I mentioned in one of my slides, that we are trying to engage with different types of partnership, and Commonwealth is a very big of our partner, and we want to collaborate even further with them. We have already had an event where our Honorable Prime Minister was present, and it was a high-level discussion with the Commonwealth of Nations entitled A Call for Commonwealth Climate Prosperity Collaboration, which was attended, as I mentioned, by Her Excellency Ms. Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, and the Chair of the CVF, and Her Excellency Ms. Patricia Scotland, Commonwealth Secretary General, as well as by other representatives of the CVF member states, including His Excellency Mr. Ibrahim Mohammed Solih, the President of Maldives, and His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Nasheed, who was the former President of Maldives, and he is also a CVF thematic ambassador for ambition. And with his leadership, actually, the CVF was taken on launch in 2009, and then there was just, I think, 11 countries, and now we have a quorum of 55 countries. So it's all going very, very well. The second event we had, a big high-level event, and mind you, the activities I have mentioned in this slide are the high-level events only. Other than this, we had a number of side events, but due to the limitation of time, maybe we won't be able to go through all the side events that we have had, but I will be more than happy to share a synopsis of all the high-level side events that we had later on. The second one is the opening ceremony of the World Leaders Summit that we have had. And the opening ceremony of the World Leaders Summit took place earlier during the first week of the COP with a statement by Her Excellency Ms. Mia Mormote, Prime Minister of Barbados and a member state of the CVF, and she was a member state of the CVF since this was a member state since 2009 when the CVF was born. There was also an opening ceremony of the World Leaders Dialogue Summit, which was also, you know, attended by Aziz Akon, the Prime Minister of Morocco. And this afternoon, I have had a conversation with one of my colleagues in CVF who just mentioned to me the fourth event that you can see, the CVF Leaders Dialogue, have a start global awareness for how much a forum like CVF can make a difference into creating awareness. So I'll just give a little bit overview about the CVF Leaders event, Leaders Dialogue, which we had on the 2nd of November at COP26, which was the first high level event of the CVF since 2016, and it was held during the first week of COP26 and headed by the head of states and the government and the ministers from the CVF countries, along with the head of delegation and high level representatives of the observer countries. As you know that we have the member states and we also have the observer states, and this is the event where we have adopted the Dhaka Glasgow Declaration. As I mentioned in my last slide, we have had 4 regional dialogues, and each of the 4 regional dialogues had ended with a communique. And with those communique, we developed a declaration where we compiled all the asks of the CVF countries on behalf of the presidency. And then we compiled the document called Dhaka Glasgow Declaration, which went first reading, second reading through the senior officials meetings. And then in the CVF Leaders Dialogue, that Dhaka Glasgow Declaration got adopted. You can find more about this information in our website, which is cvf.org, and you'll be able to see what we have captured in the Dhaka Glasgow Declaration. A part of it I will also explain maybe, and if you go to the next slide, then I will be able to give you a little bit overview of the Dhaka Glasgow Declaration, which is demanding developed countries to commit to a time frame to achieve a 50-50 balance between financing for adaptation and mitigation, and a decisive action to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or below above the pre-industrial levels. Financing for loss and damage is something that we're really advocating for, because as I mentioned, losses are happening, damages are happening, but there is no finance to cover these damages, let alone loss and damage. We don't have enough finance for climate change adaptation measures. You know, there is so much that's happening, but there is very little which is there to really cover the costs, and losses and damages are really taking forth in the coming. This is happening, and this is just needs to be addressed, and there is finance that's needed. So we advocated for solidarity for loss and damage. It doesn't have to be compensation, it doesn't have to be, you know, something else, but at least come together in the forms of solidarity. Then we also have supporting the planetary prosperity agenda through the climate prosperity plans, where we have developed our own Mujib climate prosperity plan, which is named under the father of our nation. And then we are also encouraging that all 55 countries use this as a template for developing their climate prosperity plans, and they can use this template to, you know, to take into account their national priorities, their agenda, and make it a plan that is more suited to their nations. So I think we're towards the end of my presentation, but since I wanted to be, you know, yeah, there you go. I think this is I would love you for you to go through the Dhaka Glasgow Declaration of the CVF, which is an outcome of the CVF at the COP26. COP26 was very important in terms of CVF engagements to mobilize the awareness and importance and asks of the 55 vulnerable countries that we represent. And Bangladesh being the chair, and I coming from Bangladesh, it is a great pride and honor for me to also advocate as a Commonwealth scholar to bring back here and to share with you my experiences. It has not been too long that I have started working with the CVF. It's just been 8 months, but it was full of advocacy, full of speed to really take forward to prioritize our needs to the world, to the global leaders. And COP26 was one of those events when we had the chance to voice our opinions, not just from Bangladesh, but on behalf of all the 450 countries. So with that, I'd like to thank you again for listening to my presentation. I'll give it back to you, Eva, and wonderful to be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sirazoom. I believe you need a few minutes break now before we start the Q&A session. So would you like to take a break now or after a few minutes?
I think we can, I kind of finished earlier, so I can go hop onto the presentations, question answer sessions. Okay.
No worries. Thank you so much for confirming. We do have a list of questions that the attendees have shared in advance to the presentation, the webinar. However, if attendees would like to ask any questions for our speaker, please feel free to share them in the chat box. We will be ending the Q&A shortly after a few minutes, so do take this opportunity to send in your questions for the speaker. To begin with the Q&A session, so our first question from one of our attendees that came in advance to the webinar presentation is, to what extent Bangladesh has contributed in practice to the global climate change action? What are your thoughts on that question?
Should I go ahead, or we collect all the questions together? Okay, great. Thanks. So that's a very good question, actually, because Bangladesh is, according to the former UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Bangladesh has become a global teacher on climate change adaptation. How so? Because, you know, we're a country which is very small but very big in population, but we are also being affected by a number of, you know, natural disasters, cyclones, this and that all the time. And if you see the last year we had the COVID, and we have a cyclone, we had the, you know, no specific arrangements. But Bangladesh is setting global examples by putting up its own efforts. How so? We have set up our own Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund. We have, you know, we have been allocating $450 million to the climate change adaptation and mitigation projects, with which we are supporting the vulnerable populations right under the roof. The Bangladesh government is also complemented by the development partners which are based in Bangladesh, like the UNDP Bangladesh, the World Bank, the IMF. These are all coming together to complement the efforts of the Bangladesh communities by filling up their own efforts. We've also become accredited to the Green Climate Funds, and we're building capacities of these people to apply for more projects, which are, you know, it needs capacity to apply for these projects because access to finance is already becoming very difficult. But we have access to the Green Climate Funds with our know-how, our technical expertise. We have also been, we are also being recognized as a resilient community, and now we are changing the narrative from vulnerability to resilience to prosperity. So how is that? Because we are changing the notion that, okay, we are vulnerable, give us money. No, we are also trying to show that we are also adaptive, and we are also very, very capable of using that money to convert it into resilient nation. And how? Because the grassroots communities which are there, who is really basing on their own indigenous knowledge. They don't have, you know, technical consultants coming up and, you know, giving them briefing. They're doing this from their own efforts. So Bangladesh, from the grassroots level to the national level and to the international level, at each step they're trying their best to be self-sufficient, is how I frame it. So when one becomes resilient, one needs to be standing on their own feet, you know, giving examples which can be translatable and scalable in the global world for picking up. And I think Bangladesh is really putting that example. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your response to our first question as part of the Q&A session. We have a very interesting question from one of our attendees. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. And the question is, how can a scholar be a member of CVF?
That's a very nice question as well. Basically, we are a member state accreditation. We go by our members. So I'm not sure which country you belong from, but maybe if you can tell me which country you're from, then we can see if you're one of the member states, then you can really engage by taking up the upcoming presidencies. Who knows? And Bangladesh will be followed. Oh, you're from Bangladesh, so. So you are a part of the CVF, and you are, you know, one of us, and you should take big pride in, you know, saying that you are the president right now. And as a presidency, there are many ways that you can get engaged with the forum and the secretariat. Please feel free to get in touch, and I would be more than happy to brief.
Thank you so much to the attendees who asked the question. And as they have mentioned, they are currently pursuing a PhD in circular economy. So as also rightly mentioned by our speaker, Sirazoom, if you would like to connect with her, please do so via LinkedIn. If you have any questions for her, please do connect with her via LinkedIn to take this discussion further as well. Our next question is CVF a state or a country membership forum? And if yes, what process and procedure should one follow by a state to join the forum?
Yes. So is CVF a state or country membership forum? And if yes, what process to be followed to join the forum? So this is a very critical question because it is very important to understand how this forum runs. So first of all, an answer to this question is yes, it is a state and country-led forum. It is not individual, not partner-driven. It is headed by the government. Each of the government, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Environment, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These are the key ministries which are leading the presidencies of each country. It is not important that that country has to be the president to make a difference. They are a member state, so each of us, if each of the presidents are constantly reaching out to them for engaging in the regional dialogues, the senior officials meetings, all of these are happening continuously. So in order, the process to procedure to join the forum is through becoming an observer state first, because if you want to know more about us, you can definitely get in touch with the forum and inquire about having the observer status. And then the forum welcomes countries with great deal to become a member state, to also advocate for the larger activities and become maybe 56 countries now. And again, the observer countries are also has to be a climate vulnerable country, and with that they can also go forward with their priorities, their agenda. If it matches with CVF, then definitely it can be more than welcome.
Okay, thank you so much for your response to the question. And since we do not have any further questions, we do have one question from the list that has been shared by attendees beforehand. So I will address one of the questions that have come from that list. So the final question, if there are no more questions in the chat box, the final question is, can Bangladesh influence emitters of greenhouse gases to develop sustainable environment measures?
I think with the presidency, this is exactly what we're doing, and with that, we will not name and shame, but we will put the countries which are major emitters to be accountable for the emission that they're doing, if that's the least that we can do. The Bangladesh government presidency has been calling for more finance for these countries. If they cannot reduce emissions, then they should at least take some measures so that the harm that is being done is somehow equalized. And these countries, like we mentioned, the vulnerable people who are the hardest to reach, they are in the front lines fighting for climate. They don't understand these acronyms, jargons, big words, conferences. They don't understand this. It's about their survival. They're surviving, they're struggling for their next day's meal. I was working in UNDP Bangladesh before this, and I was, really working in the grassroots communities there. With the grassroots communities there. I didn't work for too long, but the moment that I got in the climate change cluster, the climate change program of the UNDP Bangladesh is one of the strongest programs we have in the country. They work directly with these people. And if you go to these grassroots communities, you can see how much they suffer. And they don't have a pathway to go out to the emitters and say that, hey, it's all because of you. But we are here to channel their voice, channel their advocacy to these countries and say that if you're emitting, then you have the chance to make up for it. And the forum like CVF is definitely a pathway to voice that opinion for the grassroots. So definitely emitters, yes, if these emissions are happening, there has to be a way through which it needs to be addressed as well.
That's a great response to the question, Sirazoom. We do have a final question. shared by an attendee. And first of all, they have said thank you for the presentation. And the question is around the interrelatedness between the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. So the attendee has noticed that the Ministry of Environment and Forestry is part of CVF structure. How interrelated do you think biodiversity conservation is to climate change? And how is that reflected in the steps Bangladesh has taken so far?
Well, biodiversity and climate change, the connection is hand in hand. We are emitting, the biodiversity in all. It's not just humans, plants, ecosystem, the living ecosystems. It's an interlinkage between everything that we have in a niche. So when the climate is changing, it is having an impact on the entire biodiversity. So conservation of biodiversity is very important. Conservation of what we have, the ecosystem, because we come from a country which is the largest mangrove forest in the world. It is acting like a buffer to number of cyclones, right? The Sundarban is one of the largest mangrove forests, the world's largest mangrove forest, which is creating a natural defense system from the cyclones, which is coming up with high speed to protect the communities here. So Bangladesh is also taking a number of steps to protect these biodiversities, large ecosystems and mangrove forests, so that communities can be taken. IOC and Bangladesh is also doing a lot of things for protecting the ecosystems as well. So I'm sure I'll have more to discuss, but I think, given the time and premises, we can't go into the details, but definitely I would love to be in touch with the question asker, and then we can discuss in details more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the responses to the questions. I am aware that we have a question in the chat box. However, our speaker is in transition at the moment, so we will have to cut the webinar short, unfortunately. But as mentioned, please do feel free to connect with Sirazoom on LinkedIn. And if you have any further questions, or if you would like to discuss the topic in further detail, or would like to know more about CVF in general, please do get in touch with her, and she'll be more than happy to connect with you and discuss this further. Sirazoom, on behalf of the CSC, thank you so much for sharing information on your work. I know it has been quite hectic in the past few days with your travel to Glasgow and you participating in the COP26 event. But thank you so much for your presentation on your work, and thank you to all our attendees for engaging in this webinar and being part of this webinar and sending in your questions. Thank you so much, Sirazoom. Any final thoughts before we end the webinar?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for listening patiently, and I'd love to be in touch with all of you. And I'm sorry I couldn't take one last question, but definitely we'll be able to answer in details more. So thank you, Ivan, the Commonwealth Secretary, for all this.